Hopefully I come through loud enough and clear enough that you guys can all hear me. I do have chat window open, all that good stuff. This is my first time presenting in this kind of style, as opposed to having people in front of me when I do this kind of workshop. So I hope this goes well. All right, so welcome. This is tips and tricks for maintaining your computer. And this is, I will say, I've done a few of these kind of workshops over the years. This one is my favorite because this is applicable for your home PC in particular and your office PC as well. So I hope you find some relevant information on this. So what do I want to do in this workshop? I just want to talk about ways that you can, kind of for lack of a better description, do housekeeping on your computer. What can you do to clean it up and tune it up? What should you consider for spyware, anti-malware, antivirus kind of stuff? I want to talk about Windows updates, and normally, I forgot to take this bullet out, but normally I have people actually here with me, and we do a little bit of some testing of a couple of tools hands-on on computers, but I will try to demo a couple of these things for you in the last half of this. And if you have questions, please feel free to pop it into the chat for sure. I can hear you if you unmute and speak, but it probably will echo in the room. So if you put it in the chat, that way everybody else can see it too, and I won't necessarily get confused by what you're saying. That would be helpful. All right, moving on. So the first thing that I did want to talk about, the most particular thing that's useful to me as a technician, both when I do actual work like for CTS/Penfield, and when I do personal work as well for somebody, helping them out with a personal machine, is what can I do in terms of housekeeping and cleaning things up just to help it run more efficiently. And there's a number of tools and things I've got listed here. And I will note at the end of this, I will have my email address listed. I will be more than happy to forward this to anybody that's interested so that you can have the links to download these tools so that you don't forget. So please feel free to contact me at the end if you're interested in that. Anyway, my favorite tool in particular is one that's called CCleaner. And mind you, pretty much all of these have a free version, and that's what I use. You don't need to worry about purchasing them. You can get some more functions with a paid version, but I don't even worry about that, even as an IT person. These applications will give you plenty enough to clean up some stuff just by running what's built into a free version. My favorite is CCleaner because that tends to have a lot of different things in there, both for cleaning up just what I call temp and local. That's kind of the garbage stuff that's left over from just using your machine and doing things. And then some advanced stuff like the registry, which is something we don't normally tell folks to play with. But this tool knows how to clean that up, and I'll show you how to do that without worrying about getting into the nitty-gritty of like hacking and all that good stuff. And this is actually something you can run very easily just by clicking on it and doing a couple things. I'll show you that. Malwarebytes AW Cleaner. ADW Cleaner is also another kind of a single download that you can use. Glary is another one. Revo Uninstaller, ATF Cleaner. These are all awesome ones. I will demo these coming up in the second half. So if you have questions, please feel free to share them as I'm going through some of the tools. Okay, and we actually have a demo of a couple of them. So let me go ahead and get right into CCleaner, since that's my favorite one, and that's what I always recommend running first of all. So I'm going to stop sharing this window for a second. And let me go ahead and get CCleaner on this computer. So let me share my other window here where I'm doing this. First, here's the website that I clicked on, CCleaner. So I just want to download the free version. Take me to the bottom, just free download. And we'll go ahead. It should give you the option here, free download. Click that. Again, don't worry about buying it. You honestly don't have to. It should give you this file, CC setup, and then a version number. And it'll take a minute to download that. And then you can go ahead and run the installation. So I'm going to do on this computer real quick so I can show you how to do it. back to sharing that screen momentarily. It's basically just a click through and install sort of thing. So shouldn't really be any issues with that. Go ahead and share this window now for all of you. Just 1 second here. All right, close that. Again, share my screen. Yeah, it's a little awkward when I'm trying to do demos, and I've never done it this way before, so bear with me. Let me start CCleaner on here. Okay, I can share that window. Here we go. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see that screen now. This is the CCleaner free for home use application that I installed. And what's nice is because this has been a tool that's been evolving over time for a while, they keep refining it and making it better. Your first window that you get once you accept a couple of the first run kind of prompts, just click through those, is you get this health check kind of thing. And honestly, this is the easiest thing to do, is just literally click start on the health check and run it. If you have something open like Google Chrome or whatever, I'll prompt you about that. I'm just going to check that for the moment because I want to skip it. I want to close all the windows I have open. But what it's going to do is it's going to run through itself and check a number of things that it expects to see. Oh, and it's found some issues. So privacy concerns, it's got a couple trackers it wants to take out. Just junk space. This is one that I always look for, is what kind of junk is on the machine, just unused files and things like that. If it's got some things that can help remove or whatever, disable. If you have the pro version, you can do that too. But my focus is always just reclaiming space and getting rid of unwanted things. So once you get that, go ahead and click Make It Better. And it will go ahead and run that for you, and boom, just like that. Now, this is a classroom instructor PC, so not surprisingly, there's not a lot of stuff actually on here. Your PC, when you run this, particularly at home, might have a lot more stuff, and it may take a few more minutes to do this. So I would say just start it, walk away for a few, get a cup of coffee or whatever you might want to do, and then come back and it should be good. I do want to show custom cleaning though. This one's a little bit more interesting to me because it does show you everything it's looking at and things that you can check and uncheck if you want to get nitty gritty with it. So by default, it's looking at things like Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome would be listed here if I actually had closed the application, Internet Explorer, Firefox would be listed here if I had it on the computer. Looking at some other applications, things like that, and some system. This is just showing you all the stuff it will be patching, cleaning up. You can, again, adjust the checkboxes as you see fit. Hit the Run Cleaner option. I'm sorry, let's hit the Analyze first. Let's get no on Chrome, so I'm going to keep Chrome open. But you can see I skipped Chrome, but it'll show you a whole list of everything that would have to clean otherwise. You'll hit Run, and it cleans everything up for you. The other thing that I do like, and this is where I get into that whole, if you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't play with the registry. What's great about this application is by clicking on this button over here on the left that says Registry, this will clean up everything for you just by clicking that and then hitting Scan for Issues. It's going to look for a bunch of things that it knows should not be there or that are unused, whatever. And this may take a couple minutes to scan, and that's okay. Once it's done, just hit Remove Selected. And actually, if you want to back things up, honestly, I have done this hundreds of times over the years. I have never once ever had to go back to a backup file. So I always click No. If you want peace of mind, you can click Yes, and that's okay. But I just click No because I don't need to worry about it. And then just fix all selected issues, cleans it up pretty quickly, and there you go. Another more advanced option, if you click on Tools, this will show you a few other things in here. I don't recommend clicking through most of these, but you can go to the Startup tab right here, and this will show you everything that is, I don't want to say secretly, but it's kind of running behind the scenes on the startup of your computer. And it should tell you what the application is and what it's tied to. And you can uncheck some of these things or disable them, delete them, whatever the case may be, if you feel that you don't want to have that running in the background. There are a number of applications that come with or that install on Microsoft Windows in particular that will put themselves into Windows Startup by default. And you can use this to help at least just disable those to speed up your computer startup processes and to prevent unnecessary things from just running in the background without you wanting that to happen. You can also click on the scheduled task as well and see some other things that might be running here in the background too. This used to be more of an issue back when we had major viruses back in the early 2010s and whatnot. This is not really an issue anymore because they would embed themselves in tasks and things like that. So you can generally ignore this tab, but this is one that you can check just to see if you want to clean up anything that's starting up as Windows launches. I do recommend being careful with it. You can click on an item and hit disable first to see if that breaks anything, and then just re-enable it later on if you need to. If you know it's nothing you need, you can click delete and then get rid of it for good. But again, this is my favorite tool by default, or by far, I should say. It's always the first one that I run to clean up things. And it really does a great job at picking up pretty much anything that I would normally look for myself. Does anybody have any questions on that one thus far? Okay, since that's my favorite one. Excellent. Okay, let's see. What else did I have that I wanted to show off here? Let me show off the AW Cleaner as well. I'm just going to go ahead and download that application real quick, and I'll share that screen as soon as I have it. And the download links for these applications are in the PowerPoint session, which I will be glad to forward to anybody that would like it. Just let me know via email at the end of the session. And this is just taking a minute to download. Renee says, what about work laptops? You can run this on SUNY Oswego equipment if you want to. The caveat is, I know not everybody does have this by default. You will need administrative rights to install and run the application. If you do not have that, it won't run properly. So that will cause issues if you don't have that enabled. Okay, I do have the application here. Let me go ahead and start this up. Perfect. Okay, share that screen out for all of you now. Let's see the cleaner. Okay, so this is basically a little what's called EXE. This is a simple bundled application itself. You'll see a little welcome screen. Just hit OK on that. Let me reshare that. Sorry about that. There we go. And what this is going to do is it's got a bunch of little things built into it that it knows to look for in Windows. And this is going to look to find whether you've got adware, spyware. I forget what PUP actually means, but little trackers basically, and some other pre-installed stuff that it feels are potentially problematic. Basically just, excuse me, hit scan now, let it run for a minute. Again, this will depend on the speed of your computer, what you've got on there, as to how fast this will actually run. So in this case, I've got a couple things in here, but in this case, these are actually things that we put into Oswego computer images, as we call it. These are Dell function utilities. But 99% of the time, the stuff that you see here, you can just hit the checkbox and hit quarantine and get rid of it. I'm not going to do that because I want these applications to remain on this computer. But hit quarantine, and then when you close it out or finish running it, it actually will prompt you to say, to finish doing this, we want to reboot. Go ahead and do the reboot, and it actually will clean out what it's quarantined for you. It's a very simple, straightforward application. Literally just download that file and run it as administrator, and it does what it's got to do. It's that simple. So I run CCleaner first, and then I tend to run that one second. And almost all the time, it gets everything that I want. There is another thing I did not put on the slide, but I did want to show you real quick. The third thing that I tend to run in tandem, and that's something you actually got in Windows itself. So if you go to your Start menu and look down in, I believe it's Windows Administrative Tools, you should have this here. You'll see an application called Disk Cleanup, or you can type it in the search bar, Disk Cleanup, and it'll come up. If you right click and run that as administrator, which I'm going to do here, and as soon as it comes up, I'll show you the window for this as well. Disk Cleanup, share that window. This is one that's built into Windows. It's not as robust as some of the other stuff that I was sharing, but this does have some nice little things built into it that Windows knows to look for in terms of some junk and things that get stored over time by the operating system. And what I tend to do is I'll just check every box here by default, because anything that it sees here, I just want to clean up anyway. And I'll hit OK. You'll get a prompt, do you want to delete them? Hit yes. It'll run. And because it actually changed the window that's going on, it actually closed out my sharing session. But what it's doing is it's actually running a separate window now to clean up all the things that it saw there, and it just takes a few minutes to do that. And then once it finishes running, it actually just closes out the application itself. It doesn't even come up with any results. That's a built-in free one for Windows, so I also highly recommend that as well. Okay. Again, there's a few other ones here too. Please feel free to check those out at your leisure. If you do want me to share the, the presentation with you after the fact, I'll have them linked. Demonstrated that. Now, antivirus. I do get questions about what should I do for antivirus on my home computer. So anybody that is working with Oswego, our campus machines at this point, we have an application called Cylance that is running on our campus-owned machines. This is a very robust application. Sometimes I dare say too robust in what it picks up. We are always working to refine what it's scanning for and allowing making exceptions based on what it sees. But it is an enterprise level product. We cannot actually share that out with people for home use. Now I will tell you that if you've got Windows 10 or Windows 11, which is also out now at this point, by default, you actually already do have something installed, and that's a Windows security application. It used to be called Defender. With Windows 10, it's actually there by default. It's been named Security, and 11 has it as well. It's actually a little white shield that shows up in the bottom right next to your clock. If you were to click on that, you'll see options, at least on your home PC. You can run antivirus scans. You can do some other things too that are even outside of what you would think of traditional antivirus. And to be honest with you, that is what I am running on my home computers, and I don't have any problems with it. Granted, I don't browse to anything really, really horrible per se. But I've gone to even some regular sites like localsyr.com, Channel 9's website, for Channel 9 Syracuse. And once in a while, if they're serving like ads that may not be great, that Windows security application will pop up and tell me to block something, which is great. It's doing its job. So I do highly recommend just using it if you really want to. If you don't have Windows 10 yet, Windows 8 and 8.1, they also do have that. Windows 7, which is long since expired at this point, you did have something called Security Essentials. But I do certainly recommend at this point, if you haven't, getting to Windows 10, so you can have this available by default, nothing more. As to third party, there's certainly stuff that's out there that you can purchase for a cost. I've listed a number of items that are commonplace out there that I know of. Again, we don't actually offer anything, but we can recommend Sophos Home version, which is, I believe it's still free. I have the link that's in the presentation here. There's Norton/Symantec antivirus products. There's Trend Micro, Kaspersky, and others. There's plenty of solutions that are out there. I helped a personal client a while back, and we purchased some Trend Micro antivirus licenses for like $50, and that's pretty robust too. But he is running some business applications, so it was more important for him to have that stuff on there. Now, at this point, anti-malware and spyware protection, this isn't quite as big a deal as it used to be, but I still wanted to include this just for some reference for you. The most commonplace one that's still out there that it's always really good to run is this, and this is always a mouthful for me to say, Antimalware Malwarebytes. This is a free application, again, available to download. To keep up to date with it, and you can install this and run it. Check for junk, check for spyware, clean it up off your computer, run it whenever you feel you want to. I've already demonstrated ADW Cleaner. Again, that's a small piece that you can just download and run. It picks up some stuff as I demonstrated. That's actually tied in now to the Malwarebytes software. The same company owns it, and they keep both updated, so they're pretty good. Another one that's been out there for a long time is Super Anti-Spyware. I used to be more fond of this. I'm not quite as anymore because it got a little bit more bloated, and it does cause some lagging issues and kind of bogging down the PC. So it's kind of like, well, it's helping clean up, but it's also slowing things down because if you install it, it starts scanning routinely and it causes some issues. These are some more advanced ones I just linked on here. If you ever want to check those out, feel free to do so. TDSS Killer, I think they still produce that. And then Hijack This. This is a really an IT guy kind of thing. Now, a part of maintaining your computer as well is making sure that Windows itself is actually updated. If you've got Windows 10, which hopefully folks do at this point, since that's been out since 2016. If you've got Windows 10 or Windows 11, generally Windows itself, Microsoft is actually enforcing updates automatically for you, which is great because it tries to ensure that you keep updated on your machine and that you don't miss security holes, patches, all that good stuff. If you still have 7, 8, or 8.1, as far as I understand, the support for those versions are actually ended by Microsoft. You can't actually get security upgrades for those anymore. So that's why it's even more important if you're not on 10 already, get yourself on Windows 10 at the least. If not, get into Windows 11 directly. Now, I will note, Windows 11 is pretty new. I think it's only been out for like the last 6 or 7 months. Not all computers actually can get Windows 11 installed by default. Microsoft has put in some checks to see if the hardware can run it. And if it can, it will tell you that it cannot. But it is shipping on brand new machines at this point. So if you get a new computer, you're likely going to get Windows 11. And I will say it looks a little different. I've had limited testing with it at this point, but it looks pretty robust. It looks a little bit more sleek. But under the hood, the same basic functionality is there. And to be honest, I will probably be upgrading one of my home machines to Windows 11 probably in the coming months. And I will tell you that CTS is also planning to start Windows 11 testing internally pretty soon, actually. So we will be driven to Windows 11 on the campus based on the hardware coming in and things like that as well. But for now, if you're not in Windows 10 at least, try to get there so you can make sure your machine is patched and updated. The other half of this is every month Microsoft puts out their general Windows updates. Usually the second month of, or the second week of every month is their patch Tuesday. After that, your computer will probably download updates and just install them. You'll see a reboot likely happen. But twice a year, biannually, you'll see a larger feature update, as it's called, come down from Microsoft. There isn't really any rhyme or reason per se as to when exactly this happens. But basically, After that update gets released by Microsoft, at some point in the next month or 2 or 3, your computer likely will prompt you and say, oh, we have a major update to apply. Go ahead and do it. I recommend doing it. Just make sure that your computer is even more patched. I do see a question here in chat, actually from Deb here in the library. Same question, how do you update to Windows 10? Do I download it from somewhere? Do I have to take it and have it done somewhere? Mom's computer is still in Windows 7. Oh, no problem, Deb. At this point, Microsoft is not allowing the free upgrades anymore. They have done that for a while to try to get people to buy into it. They don't anymore. So the only way that I know of is that you'll have to actually go to like a Staples or Office Max or Amazon or something like that, some third party, or you can, I think you can even do it from Microsoft if you want to, and actually purchase a license for Windows 10. I don't think there's any other way to get it at this point, I dare say, for free, other than purchasing an actual license from Microsoft. They were pretty generous in allowing upgrades to Windows 10 for, I think, 2 to 3 years. But they have stopped that, that free download, unfortunately. So with the feature updates again, it's not the same as a monthly update, it's something a little bit more than that. And the reason that Windows is doing this is because Windows is now kind of doing what's called software as a service, where instead of releasing a new Windows version literally every year, instead they're coming out with these larger patches, these larger updates, that when you install it and then it reboots your computer, it's kind of installing like a new Windows operating system, but it's not a full, complete reinstallation from scratch. It's kind of like a middle point. It's sort of more like an old school Windows XP or 7 Service Pack kind of thing. And again, this helps to keep Windows current, and Windows or Microsoft does offer sometimes some new features or tweaks or some apps in some of these future updates. So it's another reason why it's good to stay current with that as well. So is there any further questions on anything regarding cleanup, tune-up, Microsoft Windows updates, anything like that at this point? Excellent. Okay, so I did want to center this, as all of you have seen, around Windows computers, because generally that's in the world, more people tend to have Windows machines. And even though I am a Windows Microsoft person, I do have to know Apple, Mac OS as well. I run Windows at home, and I know how to take care of that stuff. More people tend to have Windows, and it's just Windows doesn't have quite as robust functionality in helping to ensure that things are cleaned up. So that's why, you know, we want to make sure that you're aware of some of these tools that you can use to help keep your machine running efficiently. Now, as to Apple/Mac OS computers, generally there's not a lot you need to do for maintenance on a Mac. They do have some things that are built in to help ensure system stability and the system running smoothly. So things like disk optimization and disk defragmenting are just built in to kind of just help it always running well. Now, I will note that Mac OS is not perfect, contrary to what some folks would think. There are some issues with it, especially from an IT perspective, as far as I'm concerned. But sometimes you might want to give it some cleanup. And I've listed a couple things on here that can help in similar ways to the Windows tools that I've already demonstrated. CCleaner does offer a free Mac OS version as well. And it does similar things as the Windows version that I demonstrated a short time ago. There's also one called Titanium Onyx, which is another free application. It's pretty solid. I can't demo it on here because it's a Mac application running on a Windows PC right now. And then there's actually a nice paid one. I think it's like $45, $50. Mac Cleaner Pro. This one is very robust and will do a bunch of things to help you clean up the system. So if you're a dedicated, hard Mac user, you do a lot of things with the system, video production, graphic design, you want to make sure your system's running really efficiently, it actually might be worth it to consider something like this. But otherwise, similar to Windows, you can grab a free one. Shouldn't be a big deal. And I just want to note a couple things here. We do have our licensed software downloads page available for some applications. I don't recall how much we're actually keeping on the software downloads page per se, but always feel free to check that out. And also as a reminder, when you're at home, if you need to use applications we have on campus, you can go into CTS Apps through Citrix here at this link to use some of the applications that we have, just as a little reminder. Doing things at home that can help you with your home machine. Also, I highly recommend this. We don't plug this enough through CTS. I want to take a chance to plug this. Check out our LinkedIn Learning Portal, which is linked on this website here. You have free access to everything that's in there. There is a ton of fantastic training modules here on Windows, Office, Mac, and all that good stuff. If you want just a little bit of additional information about how to do certain things in Windows. I think there's even stuff on Windows 11 for end users at this point. So they're kind of on the ball with getting even new information out there for people. You've got free access to this as a Studio Oswego employee. Make use of it. I definitely need to get into it even more myself as a CTS employee. But definitely please check that out. And with that, that is the session. At this point, again, if people were in the room with me, we would go through a couple more things. I would, have people run a couple more tests on their machines as well. Doing it through Zoom makes it a little bit more challenging. But again, if you want a copy of this, please feel free to email me, and I am more than happy to share this presentation with you for reference, and hopefully that helps you out. Anyone have any questions before I wrap up here?
Thank you, Matt. This was great.
Thank you, Deb. Appreciate it. All right, folks, I think that's it. Thank you so much for coming. I hope it did help you out. Have a fantastic day.